What's the biggest thank God we divorced moment you've ever had? Story 1. The year after the divorce, I took my shoebox of receipts to a no-nonsense CPA named Lydia, who kept a cactus on her desk and stabbed numbers like they'd insulted her kitchen. "You were married through April last year?" she asked. I nodded. She tapped, frowned, and then swiveled the monitor toward me. There it was. My social security number attached to 2 small business relief loans and a stack of 1099s from a company I'd never heard of. My ex, Evan, had always called our finances a team effort, which mostly meant he changed passwords monthly and told me not to worry my English major brain about it. Lydia called the lender, then the state. It snowballed. The company listed, a P.O. box Evan rented while we were still together. The deposits? Straight into an account he opened using my maiden name, which he liked to joke about because it sounded more trustworthy. When the auditor rang, my mouth went dry. Lydia answered on speaker, walked them through the calendar, and highlighted one date like it was a lifeline. The stamped, court-filed separation date. Everything after that belonged to Evan. All the loan applications, all the forged digital signatures, all the cheerful, as a woman-owned business boxes he'd ticked. After we were legally split, there was this long silence on the line. Then the auditor asked for Evan's current address. For once I had it. The landlord had accidentally mailed me his renewal last month. I read it off with clean, steady syllables. A week later, a letter arrived. I owed nothing. Evan's name was on the hook, alone and bolded. I drove to the ocean and sat in my car with the windows down, smelling salt and bad decisions washing off. I thought of every fight we had about trust, how he made me feel small for wanting to see the books, for asking where the money went, for insisting on that dumb separation stamp the night we split. I'd signed it shaking, thinking it was ceremonial. It turned out to be a fuse cut right before the explosion. That night, Evan texted, "You ruined my life." I typed and deleted a dozen responses. In the end, I sent a screenshot of the auditor's note and wrote, "You did." Then I blocked him, slid my ring into the junk drawer behind the batteries, and watered Lydia's metaphorical cactus by scheduling automatic deposits into an account only I could see. The punchline? 3 months later, the lender forwarded me a fraud claim he'd submitted in my name. He spelled my maiden name wrong. The first time he couldn't use me to look trustworthy, the world finally saw him clearly. Story 2. I'm the kid. They divorced when I was 9, and for a long time, custody meant mom's 1-bedroom apartment with the creaky futon and dad's house with the trampoline and the kind of cereal that turns milk neon. Dad's side of the family spoke about him like he was made of stainless steel. Mom was emotional, disorganized, lucky to have his child support. At every handoff, my grandma would tuck an envelope into Dad's pocket and say loudly, "For the boy, since your mother can't manage." When I got my acceptance to state, financial aid threw a flag. Duplicate forms had been submitted listing wildly different incomes for my parents. Mom's version had pay stubs and tax returns. Dad's had a spreadsheet with the word alimony, in all caps, and a claim that he'd covered my full support. The counselor asked who was telling the truth. I felt my face burn because I didn't know anymore. A week later, we were at my grandfather's funeral, the kind of church with carpet so clean you could eat off it. After the hymns, the pastor invited family reflections. Dad's sister went up and talked about sacrifices, then turned, right there at the pulpit, and said, "Some people forget who paid for braces." Mom stared at her hands. I don't know what snapped inside me, grief, anger, the pile of FAFSA emails. But I stood up. My voice echoed, which was terrifying and also kind of addictive. I said, "I have the receipts," because Mom had kept everything, not out of spite, but out of fear of being called a liar. I held up a folder, orthodontist invoices stamped paid by her debit card, landlord's printouts with rent transfers, grocery lists with totals and dates. I read the amount of Dad's child support aloud, $312.42 a month, exactly the cost of his gym membership, which I also had a printout for, because he'd bragged about the steam room on Facebook. The room went very, very quiet. My grandma's mouth made a perfect O. Mom didn't cry. She looked at me like I had just freed her from a thing that had sat on her chest for a decade. After the service, Dad tried to corner me in the parking lot and hissed, "We don't embarrass family." I said, "Maybe next time don't file 2 sets of numbers then." He blanched. Later that day, the financial aid office emailed saying Dad's duplicate forms were withdrawn and my package was recalculated. It was more generous because honesty looks poor on paper but rich in credibility. My thank God they divorced moment? Watching Mom walk to her car without shrinking, keys swinging, sunlight on her face. The man who made everything a performance lost his audience, and the truth got the microphone. Story. I was his coworker first, then his spouse, then just the coworker again because life has a sense of humor. Our company loves theatrics. Quarterly all-hands with glossy slide decks and a live Q&A where anonymous questions are upvoted. My ex, Mark, was a middle manager with a taste for buzzwords and interns. I divorced him after discovering a parallel Slack workspace called Team Water Cooler 2, where he and mentee exchanged heart emojis and performance feedback like, "Your synergy is off the charts." 6 months after the divorce finalized, we were in the auditorium for another all-hands. Mark was presenting operational integrity. He plugged in his laptop, smiled toward the CEO, and said, "Let's talk about transparency." Then he shared his screen. If this were a movie, you'd see it coming. But when it happens in real life, it lands like an elevator dropping. He'd left iMessage open. The projector threw it 20 feet wide. Up popped a message bubble. "Babe," HR asked again, "should I say we never dated?" Also PL's Venmo for the Airbnb. My card got declined. Next message. A photo no one needed to see of their room keys with a very recognizable hotel logo. Then a third, from a contact labeled legal, saying, "Reminder, discovery includes Slack DMs. Delete everything." A beat of silence. Then the room inhaled in one horrified whisper. Mark fumbled for the keyboard, yanked the HDMI cable, then tried to joke, "We're all human." The CEO did not smile. HR did, but the way sharks smile. I didn't feel vindicated the way I imagined. What I felt was distance. The man who'd told me I was paranoid when I questioned his late nights was now explaining integrity, with receipts collapsing around him. The Q&A lit up like a slot machine. The top question, are anonymous reporting tools actually anonymous? The second, is mentorship code for something else? The third, what happens when leaders violate policy? He stepped off stage into a wall of quiet. Later, HR herded him and the intern into a conference room with glass walls, the office aquarium. My friends glanced at me like the ex-wife grenade might explode. I just sipped my coffee. That evening, Mark texted from his personal number. "You did this. I hadn't touched a thing." The divorce decree meant I no longer had to. My thank God moment wasn't the schadenfreude. It was realizing I wasn't the safety net for his mess anymore. The company announced his departure to pursue opportunities a week later. He posted a LinkedIn essay about learning through failure. The intern blocked him. The slide about integrity remained in the shared drive, last edited by HR, with one new bullet: close your apps before you present. Or better yet, live a life you can project. Story 4. Courtrooms smell like recycled air and old paper, and everyone speaks in italics. My ex, Tessa, was suing for spousal support 2 years post-divorce, claiming I'd hidden assets. She brought her sister as a witness, a woman who could cry on command and had once monologued through our Thanksgiving grace. Their lawyer painted me as a crypto goblin. I sat there in my only suit, feeling like a kid in a borrowed costume. Then my lawyer asked to introduce a piece of evidence, a video file. The judge sighed, because technology in court is always a circus. The bailiff fiddled with a VGA cable like it was a relic from Pompeii. The screen blinked alive. Pulled up was footage from our doorbell camera. Tinny audio, fisheye view. Timestamp. The night before the hearing. There's Tessa on the porch with her sister, lit by the neighbor's porch pumpkin, rehearsing. Sister says, "So I'll say he bragged about the Coinbase thing at Christmas." Tessa, "No, not bragged. Confessed. It sounds more remorseful." Sister giggles. Tessa continues, "And when he threatened you, remember the hand gesture." She flicks her wrist in a clownish imitation of menace. They practice crying. The camera catches every prompt, every stage direction. Tessa reminding her sister to mention the offshore account, because judges love that phrase. My stomach went cold and hot at the same time. I hadn't known any of this existed. The doorbell had auto-uploaded it to the cloud when someone rang to leave a flyer. I never check those. My lawyer does. "You said you were going to delete the camera app when you moved," I whispered. He stared at me. "You're welcome." The judge watched the whole rehearsal without blinking. Then she turned to Tessa's attorney and asked, mildly, whether their witness still planned to testify to her recollection untainted by performance. The attorney's jaw did a small, painful dance. Tessa's sister tried to salvage it. "We were just processing." The judge raised an eyebrow that could slice marble. Motion denied. Case dismissed with a warning about perjury that hung in the room like a foghorn. Walking out, Tessa hissed, "You set me up." I looked at the metal detector, the pews, the board guy with the mop. I thought of the night she uninstalled my doorbell app and said it was creepy. The divorce had handed me my house back, and with it, a stupid little camera that, for once, saw us both clearly. I sat in my car and laughed until I cried. Not because I'd won, but because I didn't have to go home and debate whether forging a narrative was just telling our truth. The camera didn't care about our truth. It captured hers rehearsed, mine accidental, and the judge's final version, recorded, docketed, done. Story 5. I'm the woman after. The one people side-eye at barbecues like I arrived with a wrecking ball. I met Jonah 6 months after his divorce finalized, in the least romantic place, a neighborhood Facebook group where he asked if anyone had a ladder tall enough to rescue a terrified cat from a maple tree. He returned my ladder with cookies his kid baked and a thank you card spelled "Thank you, Miss Laura." We took it slow. His ex, Maya, had a talent for dramatic posts. Soft focus selfies with captions like, "Some people break vows, I break generational curses." I kept my settings private and my opinions quieter than a mouse in church. Still, at the July 4th block party, Maya showed up in a dress the shade of hostility and held court by the potato salad, telling anyone who'd listen that Jonah had stolen years and stolen money. Halfway through the fireworks, a woman I didn't recognize approached me clutching a plastic cup so tight it dented. "You don't know me," she said. "You should." She introduced herself as Nora, the owner of the yoga studio where Maya had taught during the marriage. Nora had dated Jonah's brother briefly. Small world. "I kept out of it," she said. "But I'm tired of watching a story eat the people I like." She handed me a folded piece of paper. "If you care about him, you'll give him this." It was a paternity test receipt. 2 years old, paid in cash, lab name familiar from every crime show. I stared at it until the words fuzzed. At home, Jonah sat at my kitchen table with a sparkler burn on his thumb, looking like a man permanently braced for impact. I told him what happened and slid the paper over. He didn't touch it right away. When he did, his face changed shape in quiet ways, grief shading into recognition, then into a tired kind of peace. "I thought so," he said. I begged her to tell me. She said I was abusive for asking. There are 2 kinds of explosions. The kind you hear and the kind you feel in the rearrangement of your life. He filed for a modification the next week. Not to abandon a child. Never that. The kid he'd raised would always have his love. But the money that vanished monthly into the abyss marked emergency daycare started going elsewhere, into a college fund with my name as trustee, into braces, into nights that were exactly as uneventful as a kitchen table and a movie. My thank God they divorced moment wasn't about catching Maya. It was watching Jonah read through lab results he should have been shown years ago and not break. He put the papers down, kissed my knuckles, and said, "We build clean from here." The next time Maya went live to cry about betrayal, the comments were gentle but different. Someone wrote, "Truth is healing." Another wrote, "Kids need stability, not storylines." Nora liked both. I didn't comment. I watered my tomato plants and laughed when a cat I no longer technically knew tried to climb them. Story 6. The HOA emergency meeting was called because of a dog bite, which is how you know my life has gotten very suburban. My ex, Nolan, had shown up in a polo the color of righteous indignation, holding Moose's leash like a prop. Moose, my fat, anxious rescue with the appetite of a Roomba, looked bewildered. "This animal is a menace," Nolan announced, which was surreal, because Moose is only menacing to unattended charcuterie. The neighbor kid had a nip on his finger from trying to take a salami stick out of Moose's mouth. Nolan seized the moment to grandstand. "As the legal owner," he said loudly, "I'll ensure Moose is rehomed appropriately." He stressed "legal owner" like a spell. That phrase had been his cudgel for a year. He kept the dog in the divorce the way he kept everything, on paper, as leverage. In practice, Moose lived with me 90% of the time while Nolan posted photos for likes. Our HOA president, a retired nurse named Carmen who treats bylaws like scripture, asked for the rabies certificate. I slid it across the table, laminated because I've become that person. Carmen squinted at the microchip number, then typed it into a national pet registry site. The room hummed with other people's petty electricity. Nolan folded his arms, ready to watch me lose. Carmen frowned. "That's odd," she said. "The registered owner changed 2 months ago." Nolan smirked. "Correct. Me." Carmen turned her laptop so the room could see. The name on the screen wasn't his. It was a stranger. 1AL. Sutter. The address matched a luxury building across town. The phone number had a different area code. Carmen called it on speaker because this is the kind of neighborhood where people say they hate drama while building amphitheaters for it. A woman's voice answered. "Hello? Hi. This is the Lakeview HOA confirming you're the owner of a dog named Moose?" She laughed. "Oh God, no. My boyfriend tried to gift me his ex's dog as a fresh start." I said absolutely not and put the registration back the way it was. "Wait, why are you calling me?" Every eye in the room rotated toward Nolan. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish trying to invent oxygen. It was a misunderstanding, he tried. The neighbor kid's mother lifted her phone and started recording, because of course she did. Carmen cleared her throat. Administrator solemn. Sir, attempting to transfer ownership of an animal without consent violates city ordinance. Also, you're not the legal owner. The registry shows a reversion to the prior name. She looked at me. Which is you. Moose, oblivious, thumped his tail against my shin. I bent down and he nuzzled my hand, sighing the way dogs do when they finally recognize the biome of their person. The HOA voted to require a basic training course for the dog and a boundary-setting course for Nolan, unofficially. On the way out, Carmen squeezed my shoulder and muttered, "People try this with wheelchairs and walker donations too. They forget we've done discharge paperwork." That night, a formal email arrived from Animal Control, custody confirmed in my name, with a gentle paragraph about stability for pets after divorces. Nolan texted, "Keep him. He sheds." I did. And for the first time in a year, Moose fell asleep with his head on my foot and didn't bolt awake when a door slammed. The twist wasn't that Nolan lost. It was that Moose didn't have to live as an Instagram caption anymore. Story 7. I was the ex, which isn't a fun role to admit to on Reddit because we're usually the dragon in someone else's quest. My name's Priyanka, and I married Felix at 24 because his piano hands made me believe in forever, and visa paperwork made me believe in timetables. He came to my city on a student visa. I came to his parents' Thanksgiving and learned that gravy boat is both a dish and a metaphor for class. Everyone whispered green card, like it was a character flaw instead of a bureaucratic process. 2 years in, the interviews felt like couples therapy for the Department of Homeland Security. How does he take his coffee? What side of the bed? Felix could answer all of it. He could also answer why I cried in grocery stores and why my mother called at odd hours from Mumbai. He was good to me, and I was good to him until we weren't. Our divorce was polite. No cheating, no plates thrown. Just exhaustion from fighting the same temperature about how often we'd move for his career versus mine. He said we were culturally incompatible, in a voice gentle enough to put itself to sleep. I signed. He kept the apartment, I kept the couch, and I kept the habit of checking boxes and triple stapling documents. A year later, I attended a naturalization ceremony, not his, but my client's. By then I'd switched careers, taken the exam, and become an immigration paralegal because the only way I could metabolize those years was to make the labyrinth useful. The judge gave the standard speech about journeys and responsibility. Everyone cried in 10 languages. I handed tissues and watched people become official in a room that smelled like carnations and hand sanitizer. Then I saw Felix in the hallway, pale as an unplayed key. 2 men in navy windbreakers stood beside him, speaking softly but in those rhythms that aren't a conversation. I froze. Then some old impulse to help flickered and died. I wasn't his person anymore. His eyes found me. He looked for the first time since I'd known him like a kid lost in a store. One of the officers asked, "Do you know this individual?" My mouth did a strange thing. It told the truth. "Yes," I said. "We're divorced." It turned out his consultant had filed doctored pay stubs years earlier to speed along a work visa. He hadn't told me. Maybe because he thought he was protecting me. Maybe because he knew I would insist on risk-averse honesty that can cost time. The fraud wasn't going to deport him, but it was going to stall his naturalization and possibly end his job. Felix stared at his shoes while I spoke to the officers in the language the system understands. Dates, stamps, the precise point where our lives diverged. "Everything after this docket date?" I said, tapping the decree. "I wasn't there." They nodded. I walked away with my client as she clutched her tiny flag like a lit wick. My "thank God we divorced" moment was ugly and kind. It wasn't schadenfreude. It was relief that my name, my signature, my future weren't braided into the mistake he'd made out of panic. Months later, he sent me a postcard from a smaller apartment with worse light. "I'm redoing it the right way," he wrote. I believe him. I'm glad I don't have to be the one who waits. Story 8. I'm the friend. The one who sits at the end of the table and knows where the forks go and where the bodies are buried. My group has a tradition called family dinner. That isn't about family so much as the stubborn insistence we still set tables for each other in our 30s. When Lyle announced he was bringing his new girlfriend, Bree, to meet everyone, we polished cutlery like we were prepping for a royal visit. Lyle's ex, Mina, had been my best friend since middle school, so I had complicated feelings and a really good pie recipe. Bree arrived with flowers and a dessert shaped like a swan. She was luminous and weirdly gentle with my elderly cat, which I immediately resented and admired. Lyle glowed in that way people do when they've constructed a fresh narrative plank by plank and are terrified of any loose nails. We all tried very hard to be the kind of adults who don't pick sides out loud. Halfway through the roast chicken, Mina texted me from a new number she'd given me, for emergencies only. She didn't want to come. She didn't want to be the specter. She also didn't want me to stop loving Lyle, which is not something most exes manage to say. The text said, "Open the hutch. Our dining room hutch is antique, heavy as guilt, and mostly a monument to things that need dusting." I excused myself under the pretense of checking on the pie, crouched, and pried open the bottom drawer. Taped to the underside with blue painter's tape was the ring, Mina's grandmother's thin, oval sapphire that had been stolen during the move, the fight that became a marriage autopsy. Next to it was a pawn shop receipt with Lyle's signature, dated 2 weeks before the theft, redeemed the week after the divorce was final. My mouth went metallic. I took a photo, texted it to Mina, and stared at my reflection in the glass until my face looked like a stranger's. Bree's laugh floated in from the dining room. A small bell. I could put everything back. I could let the ring sleep under there, the way secrets do, compact as a grenade. Instead, I slid the drawer fully out and carried it like a sacrament to the table. I set it down between the mashed potatoes and the lies. "Found this," I said, keeping my voice as even as a table knife. Lyle blinked. Bree went very still. The room rearranged itself around a small blue stone. Lyle tried to speak, and then did. And the thing he chose to say made me pity him more than I hated him. I was going to return it. Bree looked at him like he had turned into an optical illusion. She stood up without drama, picked up her coat, and said to me, "Can I give this to Mina?" She didn't wait for permission. She didn't need it. The punchline came 3 days later when I got a photo. Mina's hand wearing the ring again, captioned, "It feels like it remembers me." She also sent a Venmo request to Lyle for the exact amount on the pawn receipt, plus $18 for pie ingredients. He paid within the minute. Our next family dinner was smaller, the table longer. We kept a chair open, not for him, but for the version of us that doesn't excuse theft, because it happened in a season of sadness. Story 9. The year after my divorce, I bought a boat I couldn't afford. Not a yacht, an aging 22-foot sloop with enough mildew to qualify as a species. Sailing was therapy with tangibles, sheets to coil, knots to tie, a horizon that didn't text at 2 a.m. My ex, Heather, thought water was for baths and dramatic crying. We co-parented our son, Eli, with rough goodwill. Our town hosts a Labor Day regatta that's more lawn party than race. I signed up as cruising class because they name losers nicer things. Heather arrived with Eli and a cooler labeled "Snacks for Seawolves" in her handwriting. She had a boyfriend now, tall in a way that made boat decks look nervous. I kept my voice like a lake. Halfway through the second leg, a squall blew in with bad manners. Boats scattered. My engine coughed and died like it had a theological objection to weather. I dropped sail, radioed the committee boat, and watched the gray wall erase shoreline. Then I heard a different sound. A small voice, high and thready, not far at all. Ellie. He'd snuck into the cuddy while we were docking because he loved secret caves. I hadn't checked because I trusted routines more than I checked reality. Panic is a shape that grabs you behind the knees. I hauled him into a life jacket and did the calm voice parents borrow from pilots. "We're okay. It's just rain with ambition." But we were drifting toward the north breakwall, and the water got teeth. A RIB, rigid inflatable boat, appeared out of the static, the kind rescue teams use. The driver swung close with competence that felt like a hand around your spine. It was Heather's boyfriend. "You on the radio?" he called. "Committee's tied up. Hop lines." He tossed a toe. I missed. He tossed again. I got it. Eli stared at him like he was a Marvel character. We limped back in a choreography of competence and humility. On the dock, Heather's face was a weather system all her own. She didn't yell. She didn't do, "I told you so." She put her hand flat on Eli's back and kept it there. After we dried off and uncorked the thermos hot chocolate, a harbor master walked up with a clipboard and a breathalyzer. "Policy after tow," he said. Reflexively, I bristled. "I've had nothing," I snapped, wounded by the implication. He nodded, then turned to Heather. "You were operating the RIB first, ma'am." She blinked. "I don't even know how to drive those things." He pointed to the boyfriend, who held up his hands. "Sober," he said. He blew. "Clean." The officer turned back to me. "And you, Skipper?" I blew. The number was microscopic, a ghost of the rum cake at noon, but it registered. The harbor master looked at my son and then at me, and something small and official died in his eyes. "With a kid aboard, even trace counts," he said softly. "We'll have to report." Heather didn't weaponize it. She sat with me on the dock while the sun reassembled the sky and said, "I think we need to revisit the custody sailing clause." My "thank God we divorced" moment was realizing that if we'd still been married, this would have detonated our house. Instead, it was paperwork. Hard, necessary, responsible paperwork. We added a line. No sailing with Eli unless escorted by a second adult. The boyfriend signed as the second. I signed because humility saves lives. Eli drew a boat in the margins with 3 stick figures and a very large sun. I put the breathalyzer receipt in a folder labeled Storm Survived. Story 10. The plagiarism accusation arrived via a midnight email from a grad student whose avatar was a houseplant. Hey, I'm on your side, it began, which is never a soothing preamble. Attached was a PDF of my ex-wife's forthcoming keynote paper for the Regional Historical Society, an elegant argument about women's barter economies in the Dust Bowl. It was also, paragraph for paragraph, my dissertation from 8 years earlier, shaved of my voice and slicked with her transitions. When I finished puking, I did the thing academics do. I annotated. I copied my lines beside hers, drew arrows, added dates, footnoted the footnotes. I lost the part of my brain that knows normal people sleep. My divorce from Kendra had detonated not with cheating but with professional erosion. She got tenure. I got yearly contracts and a rash. We decided to be colleagues post-love, which sounds like a TED Talk and tastes like swallowing a tack. The conference met in a hotel with carpeting that looked like an optical illusion. I went because the only thing worse than watching your work wear someone else's name tag is letting it happen unchallenged. Kendra floated through the lobby in a dress the color of authority. She hugged me with the closeness of photographers. Let's be adults, she whispered, which in our dialect means, don't ruin this for me. I didn't plan a scene. I emailed the program chair and asked for 5 minutes of response time. He said yes, because academia loves nothing more than orderly conflict. Kendra delivered her talk to applause that tasted like dust. She thanked her team and the archives and looked like a woman who had finally arranged the furniture of her narrative just so. Then the moderator said, "We have a surprise respondent. Dr. Haynes." My legs performed walking. I clicked to the first slide. Side-by-side paragraphs, hers and mine, dates glowing like timestamps on a crime. I didn't raise my voice. I let the slides do their work. In a back row, a houseplant avatar person was filming with a phone peeking out of a tote bag. The room went from oxygenated to museum silent. Kendra's face did the math out loud. She reached for the lectern like it could file an injunction. When I finished, the moderator cleared his throat and asked mildly, "Dr. Vaughn, can you speak to these similarities?" She said, "We collaborated informally years ago," which is a phrase that can mean coffee or theft. He is overstating. The program chair, a man who once cautioned me about tone in an email, stood up and in a rare act of vertebrate behavior said, "We'll pause this session." The twist didn't land until the hallway. The grad student with the plant avatar approached and handed me a folder. Inside were email printouts from Kendra to her research assistant, instructing them to pull phrasing from my unpublished chapters, because the voice is already there. The RA had balked. Kendra replied, "It's his voice because I gave him the topic." The RA printed everything and slid it to me because their conscience outran their paycheck. The society pulled the talk from the proceedings. My department chair, who'd dodged my contract renewal talk for months, left a voicemail saying, "Let's discuss a permanent line." My "thank God we divorced" moment wasn't that she got caught. It was realizing how much of myself I'd been willing to let her narrate for the sake of peace. I walked outside into the winter air and it felt like plagiarism's opposite. Something crisp and entirely mine filling my lungs. Story 11. I'm a floral designer, which means I spend Saturdays elbow-deep in peonies and family politics. 3 summers after my divorce, a planner I love called in an emergency. The original florist had COVID. Could I step in for a last-minute wedding at the Riverside Conservatory? I said yes before she said the couple's names. When she did, my spine went hot. It was my ex, Damien, marrying a woman named Quinn. I told myself flowers were neutral. I told myself I needed the money. I told myself I could keep my head down and build an arch. Backstage in the bridal suite, I was wiring a cascade for the hair when I saw it, the hair comb. Silver. Art Deco teeth with 3 tiny sapphires like drops of evening. My grandmother's comb. The one Damien's mother swore had been misplaced during the move. I'd cried over that comb like a person, like a last hand on my shoulder from women who wore perfume like armor. And now it sat on a tray, tagged, "For Q, something blue." I must have made a sound because Quinn looked up in the mirror. She's the kind of pretty that's almost shy. "Do you like it?" she asked. I said, "That belonged to my grandmother." The room changed temperature. The bridesmaids froze. The planner mouthed, "Oh no," to the ceiling. Quinn didn't flinch. She picked up the comb and turned it over. On the back, in my grandmother's scratch, was my maiden name and the year. You don't argue with engraving. She put the comb in my palm very carefully, like we were diffusing something. Damien's mom brought it to my fitting, she said. She said it was a family piece. She paused. No one said whose family. I could have left it there and slipped out the service door and swallowed the outrage like old gum. Instead, Quinn did something I didn't see coming. She asked me to pin in the veil anyway. Give me the garden on my head, she said softly. But not with that. Then she took out her phone, scrolled, and showed me a string of texts from Damien's mother, bragging about rescuing the comb from my chaos and how it'll be better appreciated with us. Quinn had sent back hearts and a thank you that now read like a hostage note. The music cued. The coordinator signaled. Quinn exhaled and said, "Could you give me a moment?" She walked to the doorway of the conservatory where 200 people hummed with champagne. She took the mic from the officiant like the gentlest heist. "Before we start," she said, "a very small correction. This comb was stolen. Gasps are a cliché until you feel them move through bodies." She turned to Damien's mother. "You said it was yours. It wasn't. I won't start a marriage with someone else's heirloom in my hair." Then she looked at me. "Will you return it to who it belongs to?" Damien hissed my name. That old anger tried to stand up in me. I handed the comb to the planner instead, because I've learned to let witnesses carry my proof. Quinn set down the mic. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She put on the plainest gold pin we could find and walked herself down the aisle. They did get married. People will marry through meteor showers. But after the recessional, Quinn hugged me at the loading dock and whispered, "Thank God you were here." The emotional punch came a week later. A small box on my stoop with a note in Quinn's tight hand. Found these at his mom's. Inside were my grandmother's gloves and a locket I hadn't even known I was missing. The twist wasn't stealing exposed. It was a new bride deciding the kind of woman she would be, on the first hour of her marriage, and choosing not to wear a lie. Story 12. I'm an IT security analyst for a mid-sized nonprofit. Translation. I have admin keys to the digital kingdom and a mug that says, "Did you try turning your ethics off and on again?" During my marriage to Leo, we were a 2-laptop household with 1 Apple ID for convenience. Convenience turned into surveillance. Weird Find My pings when I was in therapy. Old iCloud photos showing up on his iPad labeled trash. That sort of generous paranoia. After the divorce, I nuked and rebuilt my entire digital life like a city after a flood. 6 months later, our org started getting fishy emails that weren't clumsy. No Nigerian princes, just perfect internal clones. They referenced real meetings, used signatures we hadn't published, arrived timed to our board packets. Someone had scraped us. I followed the breadcrumbs the way you follow a smell of smoke. SPF fails here, a login attempt there. I locked down accounts and pushed the board to hardware tokens, which they hated more than cardio. And then I saw a pattern no one else would have recognized. The test payloads hit at times that mapped exactly onto the old shared iCloud backup windows. Sunday 3:12 a.m., Tuesday 11:47 p.m. And used nicknames only Leo and I ever typed. Woo meeting. Coffee Lisa. My scalp prickled. Either coincidence had a sense of humor, or my ex had sold a version of my brain. I pulled a request from legal to collect internal logs for a potential malicious actor with a personal relationship to staff. They told me to tread carefully. I put on ballet slippers and a helmet. In the audit platform, a device label leapt out. MBP Leo Retina. Not his real name, but the kind of sloppy default he would use. The IP resolved to a co-working space 2 blocks from his new apartment. The machine had authenticated using an old mobile device management token I thought I'd wiped years ago when he borrowed my work phone during a move. I didn't call him. I called our counsel, who called the AG's cyber unit, who asked for a meeting with our exec director and me. We built a bundle. Logs, screenshots, token issuance dates. A timeline that included a photo of Leo holding my work phone 3 summers back, grinning with a beer. The investigator, a woman with a braid like a rope, whistled softly. "He's not good," she said. "He's lucky you are." The knock on his co-working glass wall happened during a custody swap. I was on the curb with our kid's backpack full of library books. He looked at me over the officer's shoulder with that old accusation. "You made this happen." I looked at our son, who had just learned to tie his shoes for real, double-knotted and proud. "I made logs happen," I said to no one, and buckled the backpack. Here's the twist. At mediation 2 weeks later, Leo's attorney slid a printout across the table with a smirk. The proof that I had been stalking him via Find My. The timestamps aligned with my therapy sessions. The mediator actually arched an eyebrow at me like I was a spy in a Lifetime movie. My lawyer turned the page and pointed to the device name. "That's her old phone," she said. "Registered to him." He never removed her Apple ID. The mediator's eyebrow migrated north. The custody order added a line that felt like fresh air. No digital monitoring, tracking, or accessing of the other party's devices, accounts, or data. Violation constitutes contempt. The nonprofit didn't press charges after he signed a consent order and turned over the token. He lost his consulting gig anyway because reputations don't like smoke alarms. My thank God we divorced moment wasn't watching him squirm. It was opening my phone and knowing the only eyes on my location were mine, and the boring little blue dot of a life I got to steer. Story 13. When my daughter was 6, she had a nut allergy, so severe that school banned 3 rows of snacks and birthday parties turned into label inspections. My ex, Caro, curated the allergy like a brand. She kept EpiPens in decorative pouches and posted tips about hidden peanut oil in mascara. I'm not mocking. Fear is a religion when it's your kid. But over time, the rules metastasized. Almonds were out. Then cashews. Then cross-contaminated grapes. Caro accused my mother of endangering our child by baking cupcakes in a kitchen where peanuts had once existed in 1989. After the divorce, I asked for a second opinion before first grade camp. Caro called me reckless. I called the pediatric allergist's office and said I would like to be present for a supervised oral challenge if, and only if, the skin test and blood work suggested it was safe. They scheduled us with a doctor whose waiting room had a mural of a dragon reading books to a crowd of vegetables. My kid laughed for the first time in an allergist's office. The tests came back low. The doctor said, carefully, that false positives happen, that some kids outgrow, that an office challenge is the gold standard. Caro's face was a weather map. "We will not risk her life for your peace of mind," she said. The doctor looked at our daughter and said, "We never risk. We test." On challenge day, I packed a bag like we were going to war. Her favorite blanket, a new graphic novel, the EpiPen Trio. The nurse placed a dot of peanut butter on a tiny spoon, the size of a raindrop. My daughter looked at me like we were doing a trust fall into history. "You don't have to," I said. She said, very small. "I want to know." She ate it. We watched. We colored. Her cheeks stayed their cheeks. Her chest rose and fell like chests should. 10 minutes later, a bigger dot. Then a bigger. At one point, she asked if we could stop, and the doctor said, "Of course." And we did. And then she said, "Okay." And we continued. 3 hours later, my kid licked a spoon gleaming with peanut butter and declared it weirdly salty. No hives. No wheeze. No emergency. Just a child eating a food the internet had turned into a ghost. Caro stared as if we'd performed a parlor trick. "But last year," she started. The doctor nodded. Last year's numbers were borderline. Borderline can scare people into absolutes. Today we learned her body isn't afraid anymore. He spoke gently, because grief comes in strange costumes, including relief. The twist came on the ride home when my daughter said very quietly, "Can we have a peanut butter sandwich at your house sometimes? Not every day. Just, it smells good." And then, after a long pause, "At Mom's. Can we not tell yet?" It wasn't betrayal. It was a child figuring out how to live between 2 religions. We disclosed to the school with documentation. We kept EpiPens because the universe is wild. Caro joined a Facebook group for post-allergy adjustment and posted a photo of our kid holding a Reese's like a trophy. The caption read, "We were scared. We learned. Thank God for science." My thank God we divorced moment wasn't the sandwich. It was realizing that away from Caro's theater, I could make decisions rooted in curiosity instead of control. And my daughter could taste a world bigger than fear. Story 14. The storage unit guy called because my name was still the secondary contact on the account my ex, Marcus, stopped paying. "We're auctioning 17B on Saturday," he said. "Sometimes heirs want to check for photographs first." Heirs. I laughed a noise that didn't know where to go. Curiosity won. I told myself I would rescue a few baby pictures and let the rest sink back into the sediment of other people's junk. The auction was a hot, dusty hymn to regret. A small army of treasure hunters in trucker hats fanned themselves with bidder cards. The door rolled up on 17B and the smell hit like wet paper and old secrets. Boxes labeled books, taxes, XMS, a black trunk with brass corners, a child's rocking horse that had never been ours. I won for $220 because apparently broken printer scares everyone off. I filled a pickup with the sad archaeology of a life, our wedding guest book with 3 names angrily scratched out, his cousins, a panini press, the painting his aunt did of a lighthouse we pretended to like. In the trunk, under a blanket, I found the folder that made my hands shake. Adoption. We had talked about it late, when the fertility meds made my heart do marching bands. We'd gone to one class and then he'd decided the universe would surprise us if we stopped trying so hard. The folder held intake forms, brochures, a list of agencies with check marks, his handwriting. On the bottom was a notarized letter, never filed, authorizing an agency to proceed with a single-parent home study at his new address, dated 2 months before he moved out. I sat on the concrete while a forklift beeped somewhere and tried to put time back in order. The letter listed, spouse not participating. The space after my name was a long, official blank. There were also letters addressed to me, unsent. Some were apologies with timestamps like AA chips. Some were rationalizations that read like TED Talks. And then, folded into an envelope with a pediatrician's brochure, a photograph of a toddler girl with a bow too heavy for her head and a sticker that said, matched, pending. My stomach dropped through the floor. He had gone to a meet and greet. He had held a child and planned an entire life that did not include me. I called the number on the brochure with hands that didn't feel attached. The social worker listened like a person who has heard 1,000 versions of grief. The match didn't go through, she said quietly. The birth mom chose a family with grandparents nearby. Mr. Keller. He was not transparent with us about his marital status. We closed his file. Transparent. A glass word for a cement fact. The twist came 3 weeks later when a small square envelope arrived, handwritten in a tidy, careful script. Inside was a photo of the same toddler, now hollering at a cake with both fists. The family had found my address in the paperwork the agency kept. The note said, "We were told there was a wife who might worry about what happened to her. We want you to know she is joyful and safe." On the back, a P.S. "If you ever want to meet for a park day, we would love that." My thank God we divorced moment wasn't fury at Marcus's unilateral fantasy. It was relief that I hadn't become a supporting character in a play he wrote without me. I pinned the photo on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse and took a breath that reached my toes. Story 15. I teach 7th grade English, which is to say I'm a referee for hormones with notebooks. Our school uses a co-parenting app that timestamps custody communications because paper folders get lost and kids shouldn't be messengers. One afternoon, Sam, sweet, literal, brilliant at drawing machinery, showed me his comic in the margins of an essay. It was 2 robots, one labeled Mom Unit, one Dad Unit, pulling a tiny robot until its bolt squeaked. "It's supposed to be funny," he said, and smiled like an apology. 2 weeks later was our overnight field trip to the State Science Museum. The app requires both parents to digitally sign, which it logs with GPS and device ID. Mom signed at 7:14 p.m. from her phone. Dad didn't. The morning of departure, a permission slip appeared with a wet signature in blue ink. Dad's name in a handwriting that looked a lot like Sam's. I pulled him aside. "Bud," I said, "we're missing one signature." He swallowed. He said he'd do it. He just forgot. He looked at the bus like it was Paris. I checked the app again. Nothing. Policy says no kid on a bus without both signatures, which is a policy built on bones and lawsuits and the worst stories I have been told after parent-teacher night. I called Dad. Straight to voicemail. I called Mom. She was at work, panicked, said she'd been texting Dad all week. Our principal said the sentence principals say, "We have to follow the policy." I pictured Sam's robots. I put him on a bench with a granola bar and told him I was trying. At 8:17 a.m., a new Dad signature popped up on the app. The GPS ping said it was signed from a device in our parking lot. Relief washed through me, then snagged on a nail. The device ID matched Mom's phone from earlier. The app flags duplicate devices for the same account because humans are inventive, and courts are tired. 10 minutes later, Dad screeched into the lot in a truck that sounded like a dare. He jogged over, smug. "See?" he said. Signed. He winked at Sam like they were co-conspirators in a heist called Permission. I asked him to step into the office. I showed him the log. I said gently, "You can sign now, but the app records that you did not sign before. Your ex forged your consent because she didn't want your son to miss this." He blustered about technicalities. He said words like "my time" and "my rights." I said "my responsibility" and slid the tablet over. He signed, because in the face of a bright bus and a cafeteria breakfast smell, some men become fathers. The twist came at lights out in the Dino Dreams exhibit, when a kid in a headlamp whispered, "Ms. A. Sam's crying." I crawled between sleeping bags to the glow of his flashlight under a blanket. He wasn't crying. He was drawing. He'd sketched 2 robots again, but this time they were holding a smaller robot's hands, not its arms. And all 3 were looking at a fossil that looked like a question mark. "I thought we weren't supposed to lie," he said quietly. "But if she hadn't, I wouldn't see the giant sloth." I told him something I wish someone had told me at 12. That adults are messy machines. That lies told to get you a dinosaur aren't the same as lies that make you small. That his mother shouldn't have forged a thing, and that his father shouldn't have made a signature a weapon. The next week, the family was ordered by the mediator to keep devices separate. Dad's custodial time stayed the same, but the app would now ping the court when signatures lagged. My thank God we divorced moment wasn't mine exactly. It was watching a kid realize the tug of war was adults trying to balance on opposite ends of the rope, not his job to be the knot. He brought me the comic the next day with the robots building a bridge. One had my hair. I hung it by my desk like a permission slip to keep believing we can do better.